Good morning, everyone. My name is Daryl Bennett. Come back swinging. I want to show you today the burning bush. Now, of course, this is not the picture of the actual burning bush. I don't know what it looked like then, but I want to make a connection between what was the burning bush in Moses' day and what is happening right here, and why we have to be very sensitive and understand that it has very practical connections to our everyday lives. Now, many of us have read the story of Exodus like a storybook, and we have not really read it to understand that it has very, not just practical implications, but it is speaking to us. It is speaking to us now. One of the most interesting things that I think is glossed over when we talk about the story is how Moses comes to understand what is taking place. Now, I want to give you something, and I want you to just chew on this and think about it and let this kind of just rest in your heart over the weekend. And I think it will speak to you in many different ways. Now, think about this. We are told, look at this right here. Now, this is an image that I got. I looked on Google because I wanted to see what would this burning bush. All we know is that the bush burned, but it was not consumed. It was a great sight. I really couldn't find anything that was like it, because everything that I looked up that's burning, it's consumed. But this is the closest that I could get to something that perhaps Moses would have seen, this sight. Imagine this, a sight that is something to behold, a bush that is burning. It is not just that the bush is burning, we're told, that makes it so spectacular. The bush is burning, but it is not consumed. But check this out. We're told that Moses sees the bush, and then he says within himself, let me turn aside to see why this thing is happening. And then we are told that God calls out to him and begins to give him the mission. The whole reason I got on here this morning is because I wanted you to hear this. Before the mission came, Moses had to turn his attention. Everybody in life will get a burning bush. For all we know, this was not Moses's first burning bush. We know this was not the first time that a bush burnt on that mountain, but maybe Moses saw it before and just never turned aside. How many times in life do great, wondrous, terrible, dreadful things happen, but we don't turn aside? We don't change. We don't turn course. That's really what I'm talking about. Moses was heading somewhere. In fact, if you read the text, you are privy to the fact that Moses was a shepherd and he was keeping sheep. He was tending to the flock. He was headed somewhere, but he saw a great sight and he pivoted. We are living in a time of pivot and disruption. It's a term that gets thrown around often, of course, for those people who are in the sales world or the corporate world, for those that read about people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. You know, you hear about this word disruptors. But what does it really mean to be a disruptor? And I would suggest to you that before there was ever an Amazon, before there was ever a Netflix, that the original disruptor is God. Shaking and disrupting our paradigms, our patterns, our way of thinking. Now, you can look at this individually and you can think to yourself as you're listening, where in my life has there been a bush? Where has there been a place where it's clear that something beyond me is trying to get my attention? That's what Moses was experiencing on the backside of that mountain. He knew that even though what he saw was fire and grass, he knew that it was more than just fire and grass. Do you have the perception to understand that what you see is not all that what you should see? That's really what I'm talking about. The difference between what's her name, Helen Keller, called sight and vision. Everybody at some point perhaps might have sight, because it is really just the byproduct of your ocular senses. But sight is the ability, capacity to see what is. But vision, however, is the capacity to see what could be. Do you have vision? And so we're told that Moses turns aside. And this is what I want to say. As a nation, we are at the place of a burning bush. We are. You know, you don't have to be a historian to know that 2020 was unprecedented. You don't have to, be a collector of books to know that this this time that we're living in is not just cataclysmic, but it is so precipitous. We're living in times where you know that something is about to happen. Good, bad, ugly, we don't know, but something is about to happen. It is a burning bush. The question is, as a nation, as a people, as a community, will we turn aside? And I want to tell you something. As I'm asking you this, I'm asking myself the same question. I believe that we are all being called at this moment to turn aside. That's really what I got on here to say, that Moses had to pivot. God was disrupting him. See, the story of the burning bush is more than a religious, spiritual story. It has very practical implications. It's the story of pivoting and disruption. God from above was disrupting, and Moses had to pivot. It took both to make the change on earth. The Israelites would have never been delivered if Moses never pivoted and God never disrupted. And I'm wondering today, what is God disrupting, and where do we need to pivot as a people, as a nation, as a country, as a community, as companies, as organizations? Where have we charted a course? And that's good. And we've made plans, and that's great. And we've strategized, and that's wonderful. But where is it that we're being told it's time to pivot? Moses would have died on the backside of a mountain, obscure and never living his promise, had he not turned aside. I think it's a blessing to turn aside. If you, where's my book? Where's my book? Come Back Swinging. I talk about that in Come Back Swinging. The power of come back swinging is turning aside. It's not just that we keep going in the same direction. It's not just that we're stubborn and we close our eyes and we say that, we're going to make it no matter what. But part of come back swinging is turning aside. It is pivoting. It's the story of disruption. And I thank God in my life that God disrupted my pattern. I thank God that God is disrupting my pattern. And I thank God that he loves us as a people, us as a nation, us as a world, us as sheep scattered without a shepherd enough that he would continue to disrupt what should not be. Because the truth of the matter is, though this looks unnormal, that's really what made Moses turn aside. I'm coming to a close here. He looked at this right here and he said, this is not normal. This stuck out against the landscape. But I want to tell you the truth, that God really, he has a sense of humor. And he used something out of the ordinary to point out to Moses that, Moses, your whole life is out of ordinary. The whole way that the world is designed right now is out of ordinary for what I had designed it to be originally. And I think that part of the story of the burning bush is that it is a mirror to us. Then in the burning bush, we see an anomaly, but also it helps us to look inside of ourselves. Look at what's been going on. I want to bring this practically. Look at what's been going on in this country. It's a burning bush, a constitutional crisis, a time where even though everybody looked to the election as if it would all be said and done, and now that the election is over, we find we're still in the most bitter political place we've perhaps ever been as a nation. We're facing a burning bush that is not going to be fixed from above. It's not going to be fixed by some political party. There will be no one election that will change it. It's a bush because it's not about fire and water. It's not about just the virus. It's not about just riots and unrest. It's not just about laws and policies. People, we are wrestling not against flesh and blood, against carnality, but against powers and forces and rulers of darkness of this world. I didn't even come on here to say all this, but the point is that Moses had the prescience to understand that what he was looking at was deeper than what he was looking at. And if we're going to get from here to there as a nation and as a people, we have to understand that what seems to be fighting against us is really just minuscule in comparison to what it is. It's a bush. That's really what I came on here to say. It's a bush. It's a bush, people. It's a bush. Now, we can choose to turn aside, or we can choose to keep going. Moses could have kept going. God would have chosen somebody else. God would have freed his people. Deliverance was going to come for the Jews one way or the next, but Moses would have missed it, and perhaps they would have had to wait a whole nother generation. And my prayer for me today, really, and for you, is that we don't miss the bush. Don't be the guy and the woman that walks by this and keeps going. Now, maybe for you, this, wherever you live, is normal, so I don't want you to get focused on this just this mental image of the bush. Wherever the bush is for you, whatever is out of order for you, I would have missed a lot of heartache in life if I would have looked up and saw that, wait a minute, it's a bush. I would have missed prison if I realized it's a bush. There was signals and signs that it's this is not that. That's really what I came on here this morning to say, that there are times in life where even though you think this is that, you will get subtle clues, signals, and signs. And if you are perceptive, you will come to recognize that this is not that. This is one other thing I want to tell you as I leave. That first I wanted to start talking about people. Moses was a person and he saw the bush, he turned aside. And as people, when we heed the call, when we turn aside, we understand that there's disruption happening, big things happen. And then I begin to talk about not just a person, but a people. That Moses' mission was not just connected to him. Yeah, we thank God for Moses, but really it was about what Moses was going to do. And so God was delivering a people. He was using the bush to deliver a people. This is what I really want to come on here to say. It was not just about the bush. It was not just about the person, but it was people. There is something in you that's going to elevate communities. That's why I get on here and do this. There's something in you that's going to change nations. That's why we're passionate about what we do at comebackswinging.com. That's why at the B Square Global Group, the company that I founded, that we are squarely and firmly with changing the way education is done and professional development, because we understand that in pushing persons, we're really pushing people. But this is the last thing, and this is really the level that I want to talk about. I want to talk about the shift that happens in eras. Remember that scripture that says that I will be with you always, even to the end of this world? Well, some translations say this age. I really like the word age, because there are ages in life. For those that study history, you understand that there are ages, that there are epochs that we find ourselves in. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it here. I promise I won't, because I could be on here for 3 hours talking about this. But one of the most fascinating points that I find in history is that when you look at 1914, when the world is entering World War I, excuse me, you find that the world looks drastically different than it looks even 5 years later. What do I mean? 1914, look at the world. Most of the world, as we call the known world, particularly the Western world, were ruled by monarchs. It was completely different. 1914, the world looked one way. And literally in the course of 5 years, you had not only a cataclysmic world war, but the Spanish influenza. And it had drastically disrupted the world. So where the world was in 1914 with monarchies and all these other things, literally there were like 2 monarchies left. And we had this shift to where we see today, this republicanism and governments. It shifted everything. The point was that the people that came out of World War I did not understand this was just not another war. They didn't get it. It was not another war. It was the end of an age. In fact, there were many who tried to fight to bring back kings. I want you to understand that the fight in World War I really can't get into that here because that's a whole nother thing, was really not about Russia and versus Germany and all the stuff that they teach you. It was really about one rule versus the next. It was the rulership of kings and monarchs. That's why soon as the Russians got rid of their king, they withdrew from the war, because it was really about the old powers of Europe, the old kings, the old structures who were fighting to keep things as they were. They were fighting against democracy and socialism and what they saw as communism. And so what's interesting is that the Bush then was a shifting of an age. It changed everything. It changed the global financial structure. It changed the global governance structure. It changed what countries had say. It changed the fact that the pound was the world's reserve currency, and now it became the dollar. It changed everything. The educational system, the way passports were done, visas, international travel, everything shifted as a result of World War I. In fact, more than World War II, more than any other war that we've ever studied. And that's because it was a shifting of an age. And I started by talking about sometimes the Bush is a shifting personally. Sometimes the shift is people. But then sometimes the Bush is a shifting of an age. People, I want you to hear me. I want you to listen to me clearly. The Bush is not just signaling a change in people. Persons, a change in people. This is a cataclysmic time because now we're seeing the shifting of an age. And the fight that you see Much like we saw in 1914 when there was this fight against communism, there was a fight against socialism, and there was a fight against really changing the old structure. There were so many countries that were invested in other countries keeping their kings because they thought if they get rid of their kings, they'll get rid of ours. And that's what we saw happen. And I want you to understand, this is what's going on now. When you saw the Arab Spring happen in about 2010, 11, 12, this was the beginning of the Bush was burning, people. The Arab Spring, look this up. It was not about a time like actual spring, fall, summer. It was the springing of nations across the Arab world that recognized we don't have to be under the hegemony and under the iron fist of the Western world. That was the beginning of the Bush being on fire. And then when you see the rise of ISIS, when you see how the wars that we used to fight, we can't fight them that way anymore. That ISIS was the beginning of that we no longer now fight countries. It's not that way anymore. We're no longer fighting the USSR and Russia. We're fighting against governmental structures that aren't even really captured by national borders. It's a Bush, people. It's fire. And there's a shifting happening. And even the United States government can't keep up. That's why they couldn't understand why ISIS was blossoming the way it was. And then there was COVID, because it's a shifting of an age. And so they thought, well, we'll just be home for a couple of weeks, but they didn't recognize it was a shifting of an age, that everything went virtual. It's a shifting, that it was like an unscrambling of an egg. Scrambling of an egg, you can't unscramble it again. It's no such thing as now people just go back to work. It's a shifting, people. The bush is on fire. And the question is, will we turn? Or will we just pretend like this is just business as usual? Will we turn? The fight that we see in this country and across the world, because it's not just in this country. We're seeing it in Brexit. We're seeing it there. We're seeing it in the Philippines. For those of you that study international politics, please understand that the conservatism and the nationalism and the tribalism that we saw in this country is not just in this country. It is a spirit that is seeking to grip the world. We see it happening in the Philippines. President Duarte, one of the most disturbing, I probably said his name wrong, one of the most disturbing leaders that has come to power in the Philippines. He has pretty much the same type of tactics of they're using violence and all these, because it's a shift happening. And governments around the world are scared of what happens when we lose control. Bitcoin, GameStop, it's a shift. Because it used to be they can manipulate markets and they can manipulate news, but now it's a shift. That's why it's such a fight to get people back to work, because it's like, wait a minute, we don't have control, because it's a shift. It's a shift. And there's a burning bush. And the success comes in the pivot. Let me be very clear as I get off this, for those that are just getting on here, because I told you that the burning bush is a story of pivoting and disruption. You don't have a say in whether it gets disrupted. The bush was going to be burning, whether Moses turned aside or not, because that came from above. There are some things, I know we're taught you are the center of your universe and everything you speak will happen, but I come to beg to differ. There are some things that will happen above and outside of you. There are some things that your hand cannot turn. There are some things that were written in the stars before the earth came into existence. And so the disruption's happening. You can think you can move COVID. You can think you can tell people not to wear masks, but the disruption's happening. The question is, will you pivot? And so we're told that what changed the game for Moses, what changed the game for the Israelites, what changed the game and shifted everything was not just that there was a bush, people, but it was that he saw it and he turned aside. And check this out, because I want to make the connection between person, people, and shifting of age. Let me take it back to Israel. You already know that when Moses turned aside, it wasn't that his life became rosy. He had a lot of challenges after that. But when he turned aside, it says that that's when God called out to him. God did not call out to the bush from him until he turned aside. There are some things that are not going to happen until you shift your focus. I just want you to know that. It's just not going to happen. I understand, and I know that we've sometimes read this as if there was a megaphone that came out for the bush would have stayed burning, but it was a silent bush until Moses shifted his focus. So that's the first thing. But then I want to talk about what shifted as a people. When Moses took up the mission, when Moses changed his focus and took up the mission, it changed the trajectory of an entire people. We are told that the message that came out of the bush was, I have seen the affliction of your people. I heard it. I know it seemed like I didn't. I'm not even going to touch that because I'll be on here for another 30 minutes just excited about that. Because all closed eyes are not sleeping, y'all. Just because it wasn't spoken about doesn't mean it was not noticed. And so the word from the bush came. I've seen it. I've watched it. And I ain't happy about it. I said ain't, not the bush. I ain't happy about it, but I'm sending you to make a difference. Remember the guy that writes much later? He says that those who are closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. I think he's the one who founded Just Leadership USA. So Moses goes back to the place. I didn't plan to tell the whole story, but I'm going to go ahead and do it for somebody. He goes back to the place where he ran from. He goes back to the place where he thought because remember, he left Egypt because he was running for his life. And so he goes back and he helps to deliver his people. But this is the other part that I really want to get to. Remember, I told you level 1 was it shifted people, persons. Level 2 was it shifted the people. Usually we clap about that. The Israelites were saved. The Hebrews were delivered. And that was the end of the story. But it was not. For those of us that study history, we went back to want to understand, well, what happened to Egypt? Because though the story of Scripture follows preeminently the story of one ethnic people, we know that the story of God follows everybody. So we wondered, well, what happened to the Egyptians? What happened? Because we dare not think this is a storybook. I'm not coming on here to talk to you about a storybook. This really happened. We have historical reference to know from other places that there was a cataclysmic event that somehow caused this enslaved people to be brought out, as one king writes, on eagle's wings. Yeah, eagle's wings. Eagle's wings. But this is what I want to talk about, the shift. This is what I'm going to talk about, the shift. Now, you know that when Pharaoh, because he was so upset that the people were about to leave. Well, he told them they could leave, then changed his mind. You know that he sent his army, his chief army, his best generals, as it were, after them. And you know what happened, that, the waters overtook them. But I wasn't satisfied with that, because I wondered, was this a storybook? Was this made up? So we looked to other sources to find out, was the story of Moses really real? Is this just something we tell ourselves to make ourselves feel better? But there is historical fact that we know. In fact, there are some who believe that Moses, we're able to trace him back, that his mother was, or the woman that raised him was perhaps Hatshepsut herself, who becomes queen. Remember, we're told that this woman, who is the daughter of the Pharaoh, who we think is Thutmose, Thutmose the first, which is why they give the boy the name Moses. But anyway, Moses really lived, we know that. But let me get to the shifting of not just the person and people, but the shifting of an age. This is what we know happened. We know that Egypt was never the same. Egypt was a world power. Egypt was global, y'all. Egypt was global. Nobody messed with Egypt. Egypt was known everywhere in the known world. Egypt, we know this for a fact now. We know that Egypt was trading with South America before they knew that there were even boats. So that's a whole other thing. And how do they know that? Because the random fact, but cocaine is only produced, or at that time in the world, many thousand years, was only produced in South America, but yet it was found in the nostrils or whatever of some of these mummies. So the point is, they were all over. Where am I going with this? The Egyptian empire was known globally, and it was a world power because of a lot of things. It wasn't just because they refused to let go of God's people. I think because they, all these other things, they refused to let go of God's people. So many things happening. We find that it ruined their economy, it ruined and this was regrettable. It was regrettable because it did not have to happen. The Pharaoh did not have to hold the people as long as he did. But this is what we know, that through the deliverance of the people, the Hebrew people, that there were nations all throughout the world who were on notice that there is a God that fights for his people. That's what I was coming to. That's really what I was coming to. There is a God. No, really, you would see it written. you would see it written. It was the king, I believe it was the Hittite king who writes. It was the God of his people fought against the Pharaoh and his gods, because that's how they believed, that they only saw things as God. So they said, how could it that this people who had been oppressed, how could it that this people who were unlikely rise to supremacy? And so the story was not really even a story about the Hebrews. It was not a story about Moses, because I want you to understand how much bigger your mission is than you. It was the story about the kingdom. It was the story about the overall plan for the deliverance of a world, and how God and the overwhelming reaches that God will go through to bring his people back unto him. That's really what the story was. And so as I sign off, I want us to ask ourselves, where's the bush? Because there is a bush. But the question is, where is it? And then I want you to ask yourself, have I turned aside? You know, turning aside means, am I doing anything different than before I noticed that there was a bush? I would think at the very least, if I'm Moses, even if I don't turn aside to stop and wonder at the bush, I would think if I see a bush that's on fire, I would at least try to avoid and not touch it. It would change my behavior. That's the point. It's no way to see something like this. It's no way to go through COVID and then not shift everything. I'm not saying you quit your job. I'm not telling you to do that. But I'm saying you had that business in your heart for that long. You had that dream. You had that goal. You've had that relationship that you want to mend and you know you want to. It's no way that you went through all that year in COVID locked in your house. You mean to tell me you're going to just come out and you go back to the same way it was? It's no way after all the unrest that we saw, as a nation, all the wokeness, that we can just put the toothpaste back in the tube and just sit back and pretend like it didn't happen. No. And so the question is, have I turned aside? And this is the last question. Who are the people that are counting on me? This was on fire, physically. But the Hebrews were on fire. The Egyptians were on fire. The world was on fire through rage and hate and bigotry. I'm talking back in Moses' day. It's still happening now. And if Moses didn't turn aside, if he didn't notice the bush, if he didn't reverence the bush, I didn't even talk about the fact that he said, take off your shoes. This is holy ground. I didn't even get to that. But if he didn't turn aside, if he didn't stop, if he didn't shift, he would have missed it. And you're listening to me, and I don't know what you've been called to do. I don't know why I don't know why you're on earth, but I can tell you this: you've been called to do something. I know. And the enemy's job is to, one, either camouflage the bush, act like, well, that's normal. That's normal. That's that's normal. Oh, yeah. Oh, it'll get back to normal. Yeah, the bush will just stop burning. That's the enemy's job, to camouflage, to make the bush not seem like it's burnt, and to keep you just going on along, to miss your moment. There's a writing that says that a man who doesn't know his moment is like a fish out of water. That applies to women too, of course. It's nothing like you don't even know your moment. Have you ever been in a foot race? When I was a kid, growing up in Baltimore, we used to always be in foot. That was the one thing I was good at. Can't really play basketball, football, none of that. I was great at racing. And you know how you get on the race, on your mark, get set, go. There's a moment in life. Just like you don't run on your mark. You might hike your butt in the air and get set. And you got your calves ready. But as soon as the person says go, and as a matter of fact, you're anticipating off of the cadence of the on your mark, get set. They might not even say go. They say go, and you boom. And I believe in life. There's a moment, there's a season where there's portals that open. And you've got to know, this is my moment. It may not come again. The barriers are down. Let me give you a better analogy. When we were in certain governmental buildings that were very highly protected, there would be certain security procedures that would happen. If there were fog or if there were anomalies that would happen in the area, there would be lockdowns, because when there are anomalies that happen, systems start to fail. And that's when it's easier to breach the system. See, but Fog in itself isn't a danger, but it's just that it's an anomaly. The burning bush isn't a danger, it's an anomaly. Anything that's an anomaly changes systems, and it causes barriers to entry to lower. And I want you to understand there's a shifting happening. There's a shifting happening. Your family's been fighting for years to get out of that economic cave, that pit of working for 3 and 4 jobs and never getting ahead. And now the systems are shifting. COVID, it's a bush. And my prayer for you is that you'll understand that it's on your mark, good, set, go. Now is the time that's open. I know the business failed before. I get it. I've started businesses that failed myself. I get it. I understand that the last time you did it and when grandmama did it, it didn't work. But I want you to understand something. It's different now. It's something that's shifting, it's moving, it's happening. And if you go off of what happened before and move on that now, you'll miss it because the bush wasn't burning before. It was not burning. It was tinkling maybe. You heard some stuff, but now it's different. And so the question is, how will you react to the burning bush? Now, I didn't even get to talk about all the other things that I would have loved to talk about this story. I would have loved to talk to you about the fact that we're told that Moses is told, take off your shoes because it's holy ground. Moses is so enamored by that. I really wish I had time to talk about the fact that your holy ground might be in the thing that you despise. Your holy ground, like Moses, might be on the backside of a mountain. Your holy ground, I know you thought was going to be on the, at the top where everybody was clapping at you. What did Drake say? Started from the bottom, now I'm here. But I've come to tell you that perhaps your holy ground is in the place that the embarrassment is, and the frustration is, and the hurt is, and the pain. That's right where the holy ground is. If I had time, I would talk about the fact that Moses spent more of his encounter with God trying to talk him out of the mission. How many times do we finally get face to face with the thing that we always wished? How many times do we finally get our prayers answered in that the thing that you said, if I could only talk to my father, if I could only, and finally you got the moment. And what do you do with the moment? I can't be too hard on Moses because I've been there. Moses spent all that time. He said, I stutter. They're waiting for me. If I go back, how will they know that you sent me? Moses comes up with all kinds of stuff. God is up there on the mountain telling them, I'll give them this sign. I'll give them that. Throw your rod on the ground. And Moses was trying to get out of it. It's a natural inclination because even though he turned aside from the bush, I know he turned aside from the bush, but still the truth of the matter is, even though we turn aside, it's fear in which changes us. It's fear in which the anomaly. It's fear in saying, I've got to move, I've got to change, I've got to go somewhere different. And so, if I had time, I would talk about the fact that God tells Moses, I'm going to use that rod, and throw it down. I always wondered about the fact, two things. Why would he use the rod? Not a scepter, because he was about to go talk to a king. Those of you that study history, you know that the king of Egypt was not just a king in the traditional sense. He was an emperor. He sat above and beyond realms. He would have been unapproachable. And so for this king, as it were, this God king, as he would be called, to be approached by a man with a rod. I'm thinking, God, can you get a man something better than a rod? He's about to go talk to a king. But I think it's interesting that God uses the thing that was stuck and done, the rod. I know we've elevated the rod, but the rod was just a dirty old stick that he had been using to prod the sheep away. It was a stick that perhaps he would have used and would have had dung on it. The stick probably would have stunk. But God says, you're going to use that stick because God's going to use the thing that you would rather wish that he wouldn't. I really wish I had time to talk about that. And then it bothered me that God told Moses, take the stick, throw it on the ground, and he turns the stick into a serpent. And I'm thinking of all the things he could turn it into. Not a sweet little kitty cat. I like cats. I like dogs too, but not a dog. Not something we're familiar with. He turns into a snake. Almost like them. I mean, no matter where you're from, it's almost like you have something hidden within you that just, when you see a snake, no matter what culture, it just does something to you. But I wonder if that's God's way of saying, I'm in that which he terrify you. There's nothing that terrifies me. Even the thing that you're most scared of, I'm in that too. Yeah. And so there's all these things that's happening on the mountain. And if I had time to talk about it, I would talk to you about the fact that this was not just some momentary encounter. I don't want to talk about it like that. We have this bad tendency of doing that. That it was, oh, he saw the bush, God told him something, and the rest of his life was peachy. That was not the case. It was turmoil. It was uncertainty. It was struggle. I'm talking about up there when it was still on fire. And I would imagine he got hot. Oh my God. Thank you, Holy Spirit. I didn't even expect to go there. I never even thought of that before. Imagine the temperature. That's how you know something's speaking through me. I didn't even think about that. Now, think about the temperature. I never thought about this before. Now, I have been to that part of the world. I told you I've been to Israel. I've been to this part. This isn't in Israel now, but this is in between Israel and Egypt. Not to this exact spot, but I've seen the climate. But I never would have thought about the fact of how much hotter it would be to just be in the presence of this. The heat itself would have changed his molecular structure. Just think about the heat. Everything, the sweat. He was up there. He was uncomfortable. I know we talk about it like it was like, oh, it was this wonderful moment. I don't know if it was a wonderful moment for him. I really don't. I think in the end, maybe he can look back and say it was a wonderful moment. I don't think sitting there at that bush in the heat, in the stuffiness, it's no telling how it smelled. I'm not even going to front with you there because it was still where the bush was. And then he's sitting there and he's being confronted. He's being confronted. You have to understand, this isn't a God who came to comfort him. He's confronting him. He's telling him, Moses, I know you've been running. Now you're going to go back. Moses is 80 years old. That's the other problem I have when I see these little storybooks. They act like Moses is 16, 17. Moses is 30 years old. No. Moses today, in today's age, would have had an AARP card. Moses was 80 years old. It was 40 years he was on the backside of his mountain. And here God comes and tells him, oh yeah, I have a mission for you. Why didn't you give me the mission, when I was 50? Why didn't you give me the mission when I still was passionate about it? Why didn't you give me the mission when I still care? I'm talking to somebody. There must have been anger from Moses. Like, really? Now the mission? Now when I'm 80? Now after I've had children and I just want to spend my time raising them. Now after I've given up the business. Isn't it funny, the timing of God? How you'll think it was then, and then you give it up, and then it'll be something whispered in your ear years later, like, pick that back up. And you're like, no, I don't want to do it. Because when I wanted to do it, you weren't on board. Now you want to do it, and I'm not on board. But Moses, through it all, he goes. And it's something to be said about people who just go. I respect people who go. I know we live in a world where you got to be thoughtful. I've got to think about it. I've got to figure it out. I want to call 3 people. You remember Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where they used to have the lifeline? You could call a friend. And that's how we do in life, that we'll get the word. We'll get the mission. We'll know strongly because we stayed up all night and we know that we know what we're supposed to do, but we're still looking to other people for validation. We still want to find out from somebody else whether we should do it. We still go on TikTok and Facebook and put up polls. Should I move here or should I move there? As if somebody that never met me really knows what the calling on my life is. But be that as it may, we do all those things. But I respect people who just go. Moses, uncertain, did it. Mommy, my mother, I'm talking about, not Moses now. My mother put on her, I know I said mommy, put on her refrigerator, do it afraid, do it hurting, do it lonely, do it sad, do it uncertain, do it trying to figure it out on the fly, do it with a mask on crying, do it with your heart broken. See, it's something about people who just do it. I'm talking about pivoters now. I'm talking about people who move in disruption. I'm talking about people who have both spiritual success and earthly success. They just go. And so Moses, because he goes, even though he doesn't know what's happening, he goes. Even though he's trying to figure it out as it's going, he goes. And what we see is that in his going, God uses everything that he would have rather put aside, and he uses it for his glory. The rod, he uses that rod, that same dirty, stinky rod, and he uses it to stand up against the Pharaoh's scepter. And then when the scepter of the Pharaoh, whatever else the Pharaoh uses, and it turns into snakes, God uses the rod of Moses to eat their snakes. God uses even the past of Moses because think about it. Everything in Moses' past would have been needed for the future of God and the people of God. I need you to understand something. I didn't plan to go here, but I want you to hear something. God will use God will use something you did or had experienced personally to benefit his kingdom providentially. That doesn't mean he put you through it. Let me be clear on that. I'm not saying that, but he'll use it. Every piece of Moses' past, God would have used. I'm not even just talking about the things we think about. That, he knew the political structure and the governmental structure of Egypt, so he would have been able to speak to that. Because when we talk about him speaking, it's not just the speaking. He would have known the avenues, how to go about it. He would have known this. He was raised in the Pharaoh structure. But even more than that, remember when they go out into the wilderness and God instructs them and says, I want you to build the temple or the tabernacle. And Moses is used to he establishes an entire religious order. I believe that how he was raised in Egypt would have shown him how to do that. Now, obviously, there were things that had to pivot and shift. They're not worshiping crocodiles and carrying on. But the point is that all of those things God would have used, all of those pieces, all of those places. And this is the point. Nothing will be wasted. I didn't plan to even get on here to say this, but somebody needs to hear it. Nothing's going to be wasted. Nothing. No. Not the divorce. Listen to me. Not the prison sentence, not the sickness, not the business going down. It will not be wasted. I'm not saying that it was supposed to happen. I'm not saying that it was aspirational, but it will not be wasted. Why won't it be wasted? Because there's somebody else somewhere else that through your experience might be their bush. Oh, I don't even want to go on there because I'll be here for a whole nother day talking about that. Because sometimes your experience can be a bush. I didn't even talk about what a bush could be. I just said we're looking at a bush. I didn't even talk about what a bush could be. But let me say this, and then I'm really done. You see the bush. And God tells Moses on the bush, he tells Moses on the mountain, through the bush. He says, when you deliver the people, I want you to bring them back here. I want you to bring them back here. In fact, he tells Moses, this is going to be the sign that I didn't make this up. This isn't going to be the sign that this is a coincidence. This is going to be the sign that I'm an intentional God, that I saw the whole thing, that I was planning it from 300 years before, that I knew all of it that was going to happen, that I watched it, I saw it, and that I had foreknown this moment. This is the sign that when they come out, you're not just going to bring them where you want them. You're not going to bring them where you thought. You're going to bring them to this spot right here, this mountain. Now, what is this mountain? What is this mountain? I'm talking about this mountain where this bush was. What is this mountain? I want to talk about this mountain, and then I'm going to sign off. You got to go now. But I want to talk about this mountain because we don't talk enough about places in life. We talk all about people, and that's nice. But there are some things that are assigned to places. There are some things that are assigned to places. God designed Eden and then he put Adam in it. There's some blessings that are assigned to places. I want to talk about the mountain for a second. The power of the mountain is that the mountain was called two different things. The Egyptians called it Horeb. The Hebrews called it Sinai. I want to speak to that first of all. You can have one thing that has different meanings. I'm getting excited just talking about because you should be excited me talking to you because you know what I'm saying. That isn't it funny how it can be one mountain but two meanings? Isn't it funny how one event one person can cry over but another person laugh over? Isn't it interesting how 2020 could happen and one person be wiped out and another person come out with $1 million extra? That's what I'm talking about now. The duplicity of life, the double-sidedness of life. That's really what I'm talking about now. And so what happens is we're talking about the place. It's called Sinai and it's called Horeb. Moses would have known about Horeb. I already told you Moses was raised in Egypt. Not just in Egypt. He was raised at the feet of Pharaoh. He was raised by the daughter of Pharaoh. For those that are just joining, most historians and scholars believe that it was Hatshepsut herself that was the woman who raised him, who was in the lineage of, I keep messing the name up, Thutmose the first. So he would have been raised at least knowing 3 languages, Akkadian, Egyptian, and then I forget the 3rd language, probably Hebrew. He would have been studied and learned. He would have known all these things. And he would have been taught about Horeb. Now he was on it. Not as a prince, not as a king, not as someone sitting and wait to be Pharaoh. For 40 years, he's on the backside of that mountain as a fugitive. That's heartbreaking. See, Moses' life really went from heartbreak to heartbreak. I mean, because think about it. First, he was given up by his family. I know it was given up by love. We would call that today someone who they were adopted, and we know that maybe they were given up by love, but still the child has some questions. So Moses is a Hebrew by lineage and by birth, but he's an Egyptian by culture and by look. So much so that when he runs away, the Midianites think he's an Egyptian because of the way he looks. So he's really a male with an identity crisis. Oh, I wish I could talk about that. Oh, I wish I could really talk about that, because when people have an identity crisis, we get real funny and we isolate and we think, we don't realize that it's an identity issue. So we focus and say, they're struggling in their sexuality, or they're struggling because they got violence, or they're struggling because they missed their father. It's an identity issue. That was Moses. Didn't really know who he was. Raised by one thing, two in to be out and 2 out to be in. Wasn't a Midianite, wasn't an Egyptian, and was not a Hebrew. He was a Hebrew, but not in the sense of culturally. And so now for 40 years, he's on the backside of this mountain. And this must have been befuddling for a man who was raised as a prince. And now he's a shepherd. And again, for those of you that know Egyptian culture, you know that shepherds were looked down upon. Remember, we're told in Genesis that when Joseph brings his family, that the Pharaoh says, we'll give you choice land, but they have to be separated, because the Egyptians did not look kindly upon people who were shepherds. And so here was Moses, who was raised as a prince. Now he is, pretty much, he's the worst thing professionally that he could think of being. And a fugitive. I missed the fact of just telling you he killed somebody. That's why he had to run. He was on the run. That's why he ran to the backside of the mountain. So now we got a man raised as a prince, a fugitive on the backside. It's all this stuff that's going on in his life. I want to paint the picture for you before this happens. And he ends up getting married. He meets a Midianite. So now conflicted Moses, born a Hebrew, given up by his family, raised in the Pharaoh's house. No, he don't look like the Pharaoh and them. No telling what he was told, all his life growing up there. Then he has to run from them because he kills a man. And the same Pharaoh that he grows up under, we're told that the Pharaoh puts out a death warrant for him. Now he's out in the middle of the wilderness with Midianites. He doesn't know who the heck he is. He marries this woman, has children. I don't know how he passes on any lineage to his child, because how can you pass on something you don't know? I'm talking to somebody. I know you have good intentions, but how can you be what you weren't? It doesn't mean that you had to have your own father there, but you got to figure it's got to be modeled somewhere, a mentor, a pastor, somebody. And so now imagine Moses, who's married and has 2 sons. What could he really tell him about his lineage? Because what does he know? Everything he knows about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would have probably been something that was passed down to him, or would have seemed like a myth. And everything he knows about his people would have been told to him from afar. And now here he is, all pretty much he knows is to have been raised in the court of Pharaoh. And none of that's any good, because now he's a shepherd on the side of a mountain serving Jethro, a priest of the Midianites, we're told. This is a theme in Moses' life. He always is following people who run in a religious order. And now at 80 years old, God meets him. The funny thing is, we don't know when Moses gets married. We don't know. We know in that time, but how old his kids are, none of that. But all we know is somewhere in this time, now Moses is 80 years old, and that's when he sees this. I wanted to paint the picture for you. Now he sees this. Imagine how you would feel. Really? God, now? So we're told, this is Exodus 3, it says that he leads his flock. He's leading the flock of Jethro. Again, I don't mean to play Moses, but he's 80 years old. He still own his own. He still hasn't run his own company. He's still the manager in his father-in-law's company. That's what we're introduced to. Moses leading Jethro's flock, and he sees this bush that's on fire but not consumed. He's looking at the bush, it's not consumed. He's looking back at he's looking at the bush, he's looking at the bush, not consumed. And then we're told that he says to himself, let me turn aside and see this thing that's happening. And that's when God calls out to him. So I want us to take it easy on Moses when Moses says to God, no, I don't want to go. Thank you for nominating me, but I'm straight. Like we say where I'm from. I'm straight. I don't want to go. You picked me when my knees were still good. You picked me when I was, 40 years ago. I don't want to go. I'd come up with excuses too. And I think that y'all don't get mad at me for saying this. Remember, it was Moses, we know, that is the chief author of the first 5 books of Scripture. So he writes to us. I mean, he tells us that he questions God about some of the things. I think there were other things he said to God up there that he wouldn't dare write later. Oh, yeah, because Moses was a fire one. It's no telling. He gave us the nice version. It's no telling what he told God. He probably told God, you go kick rocks because you sat here for 40 years and watched me struggle like I struggled. And my mom gave me up and I was living in the house of Pharaoh, and then they were searching to come kill me. And then I was here on the backside of the mountain for 40 years and you watched all that and you sat there, and now you talking about you want me to go back to the people that wanted to kill me and deliver people I barely know? Nah, I'm not going for that. So I can understand his reticence and his anger, but yet he went. And the blessing is for people who go. The place. This is where I'm closing. I keep closing because I'm talking about the place. I want to talk about the mountain. Horeb and Sinai. Horeb and Sinai. It's Sinai to the Hebrews. It's Horeb to the Egyptians. To this day, it's not just about Egyptians and Hebrews. We're not just talking about ethnicities. We're talking about perspectives of life. To the end of time, that mountain for believers is a mountain of grace and power and promise. But for everybody else, they really don't get it. It's still just a bush on fire. And for what reason did he turn aside? I'm talking about the mountain. I started by talking about the bush in your life, but now I'm going to talk about where's the mountain. Where is the place that some people will call Horeb, but it's Sinai? Where's Come Back Swinging? That's why I wrote Come Back Swinging. Because I people say, was this you climbing this mountain? I said, no. I climbed the mountain. I know my mountains. Yeah, I know my mountains. See, other people might say it's Horeb, but I know it's Sinai. And do you want to know the difference when you know what Sinai is? Because that's where the place where you're transformed, and forever you're never the same. And that's where you begin to see an entire nation become delivered through what happens on that place on the mountain. Where is that for you? That's partly why I want to end this. Some people may always call that mountain Horeb. They may never figure it out. They're looking at the bush burning and they never figured it out. It's not for them to figure out. There's some places in your life they might always talk about negatively. But there's those places, that same place where that many people are going to be delivered out of. I wrote Come Back Swinging because I talked about some very, things that I'd rather not talk about, things that I overcame in my life, experienced, and even did. And I did that because I recognized that for every person that had a negative comment, there were 10, literally 10, if not more, who said I needed that. You never, see, this is the thing. every great mountain will always be called more than one thing. I don't have to get allegorical here, but there's no person on earth that you can Google, don't care if it's Mother Teresa, that you're not going to find. If they have millions of people that love them, they got millions of people that got nasty things to say. I'm talking about the mountain. So you can't get concerned about the mountain. The mountain is what the mountain is. It is what it is. People are going to talk about it. The question is, what will you do? This is what I know, that God wants to use the mountain as the place of transfiguration. I know that for a fact. That the place of deliverance is going to happen at the mountain. God tells Moses, when you bring them back, you're going to bring them back to this mountain. What did that mountain represent? Well, it was Horeb and Sinai, yes, on a people level, but on a personal level to Moses, that was a place he would have rather probably not come to. I would probably guess that if there were many places on earth that God would say, do you point to this as the place of pride? It probably would not be the backside of a mountain that he ran to after he was exiled from the place of his birth. I don't think that would be it. But isn't it funny how God uses the place of shame and hurt and pain, and against that backdrop, he shows his power. He shows his deliverance. And so many times we miss it. I'm coming full circle here. Because the bush is burning and we don't turn aside. And because we're too concerned about what other people are calling the mountain, and so we walk away from it. And we miss the bush and we miss the mountain. And Moses would have never been Moses if he missed the bush and he missed the mountain. And the children of Israel would have never been delivered if Moses missed the bush and he missed the mountain. And the age would have never shifted. You get where I'm going? The bush and the mountain. So this is the lesson for the day. What's the bush? Have I turned aside? Where's my mountain? I don't care what other people are saying. If it's Sinai, I need to meet God there, because that's where the deliverance is. My name's Daryl Bennett. I want to thank you for watching. And I want to ask you to go to darylbennett.com and to sign up if you want to continue to receive inspiration, empowerment, and if you just want to be a part of what we're doing as we're pushing the needle forward and changing the narrative and the way people see themselves. Thank you all, and I really appreciate you. Bye-bye.